Alright, so in this video we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Retroid Pocket Handheld system, and we're going to see exactly how well it can perform. This is Steve from Restalgia, and let's get started. Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, please consider going down below the video and subscribing as we are working our way towards 30,000 subscribers. Now today's video is going to be taking a peek at the Retroid Pocket, and this was very generously provided to me for review by Retroid, so I do appreciate that. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this thing out of the box, we are going to look at everything that comes with it, and then we're going to go ahead and do some emulation tests and see exactly how well this thing performs. Now, opening up the box, we're actually going to get a few different items included, and the first one is going to be a tempered glass screen protector. And I do have to say it's actually a pretty nice touch to include something like this with a handheld. Most of the time we don't get anything like this, and with these sort of mass-produced emulation handheld systems, we don't often get accessories or even are able to find accessories that will properly fit, so it is definitely, again, nice that it's included here. Next, we've got the console here, but I'm just going to go ahead and move this over to the side for now. We'll take a look at this last. And towards the bottom of the box, we actually have another insert here. And when we pull that out, we're going to have a couple of items that are going to be provided in here. The first one is going to be a micro USB power cord. Obviously, that's going to be good for charging the device, but it is also good for transferring things on and off if you so choose to use it in that way. And then the only other thing in the insert here is going to be a user manual, and this is actually something I wanted to touch base on because it's really interesting the way that these things are manufactured. So if we take a look inside of the manual and we start going into the menu navigation, you're going to notice that the manual itself doesn't even display the proper operating system that's actually built into this system. And what's interesting about this is that this device itself is mass produced. And this company, for example, Retroid Pocket, more or less grabbed this, threw their stamp on it, and then they changed a couple of things in terms of software. But you can buy this physical device from a whole host of different companies that have actually marketed it as their own handheld. In fact, a good friend of the show, Doug from Cool Toy, actually did a video a few weeks back on the Powkiddy A19, which is essentially the exact same handheld. All the internal specs are the same, the physical form factor is the same, button layout, everything's identical. The only difference is that his device was actually running almost like a condensed version of a Pandora box operating system, whereas this device is actually running an Android-based system. Now, jumping over to the actual console, when we get it out of the protective sleeve, as I said, this is going to be a very familiar form factor. We've seen this all over the place from a whole bunch of different manufacturers. That being said, I mean, it's a fairly decent build quality, but in terms of its specs, it's not a super powerful handheld. And this is going to retail for about a $70 US price point, which isn't terrible considering what you're getting, but this is by no means an all-in-one system where you can run low to high-end consoles. Now, this device is marketed as an open Android emulation machine, and it really is that in the sense that it does come pre-configured with a ton of different applications and emulators and things like that, keeping in mind that you do not get any games whatsoever. These are things that you are going to have to load up yourself, but we are running Android, and we do even have access to things like the Play Store, so once you log in, you can go ahead and try to download things. Whether there's different emulators or apps that you want to use, you can certainly look them up and see if they are compatible. Now, the other neat thing about this is that because it is running the Android system, it actually allows you to enter what's known as a mouse mode. And the way that works is if you press and hold the home button and then move the analog stick, you're actually going to get a little cursor on screen, and that's going to be your mouse mode. So you move around with the cursor, and then you press your A and B button as your right and left click, and it actually works fairly well for navigating through the screens. And then, of course, to get rid of it, same thing, you're just going to hold the home screen. Now, I do want to say that this thing is advertised as being able to support all of the popular retro systems, and they talk about MAME and Neo Geo, NES, Super Nintendo, and then they start getting into some of the higher end consoles like N64, PS1, PSP, and to be completely honest, I didn't have very good experience playing anything really to the N64 and beyond section. I mean, there's going to be a bunch of games that are playable, and I will show you guys that when I do the demo for emulation, but my recommendation out of the gate is that this is going to be more of an 8/16-bit handheld system. Even things like Super Nintendo, as I will show you, do have some issues, so we are definitely going to take a peek at that in a second. In terms of the inputs and outputs, on the front of the device, we are going to have an analog stick, a D-pad, 6-button layout, a home, select, and start button here. And you guys can see there is also the speaker built into the front of it. Taking a peek on the left-hand side of the device, we have a single power button and then nothing on the bottom, but on the right-hand side, we do also have our volume rocker, which is up and down, but it is important to note that depending on the emulator that you're using, you can actually map the volume up-down to specific buttons. And then taking a peek at the top of our device from left to right, we have a micro USB port, a 3.5mm headphone jack, we have our external SD card mount, and then we also have a micro HDMI port, which is handy if you want to send the video out to a larger device. Now, in terms of the actual specs here, we are looking at a 3.5-inch IPS display with a resolution of 640 by 480 clocked in at 60 FPS. This device has a quad-core Cortex A7 Max CPU with a clock rate of 1.5 GHz with a max GPU frequency of 500 MHz, and it does also come with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 4.0. And then in terms of the battery, it does have a 4000 mAh battery, which should get you a good solid 6 to 7 hours of gameplay, even if it's on the brightest settings. Now, the package that I got actually included a 32 gig micro SD card. Again, nothing was loaded up onto it, but it is important to note that that SD card slot is expandable up to 128 gigabytes. Taking a look at the overall build quality, I do have to say that the analog stick actually feels pretty good, and the buttons are fairly responsive. One thing that I did notice is that there is a little bit of LCD bleeding that is happening towards the bottom of the screen, and I think that's just simply because the plastic is relatively thin and cheap. So when you are in low light settings, as you can see on screen here, you will definitely see a little bit of bleeding coming through the actual plastic. Now, with all of that information out of the way, we're going to jump into some emulation, and the first thing that we're going to do is take a look at some of the basic stuff here. I'm going to go ahead and throw on some Game Boy Color, and you're going to notice out of the gate there's absolutely no issues with Game Boy Color. The screen's quite vibrant, everything looks really good, and it has no issues in terms of playing that console. Next, we're going to go ahead and jump into something a little bit more advanced. We're going to go into some Sega Genesis, and again here I didn't really notice any major issues. Everything played fairly smoothly, and it was a fairly good experience. Next, we're going to jump into some Super Nintendo, and this is actually where we're going to start to notice some of the issues. Now, for the most part, none of these games had any real big problems, but I will say that once we started getting into the more demanding games, we're talking about the FX chip games like Star Fox and Yoshi's Island, we did begin to notice a little bit of stuttering. Next, moving over to N64, I was actually fairly surprised at how well it could play some of the easier to emulate games. I got Mario Kart running on this thing with no problem, and Rampage World Tour absolutely played wonderfully, but as soon as we got into some of the more difficult to emulate games, we had some major frame rate drops and some major audio stuttering. Moving on from N64, I decided to go into some PS1, and I actually had some fairly high hopes for this. And I will say that the games are fairly playable, but we typically had a frame rate drop from about 60 down to 45 on average, and it really did take away from some of the playability. That being said, games like Castlevania Symphony of the Night played fairly well. We just really noticed some of those frame rate drops in some of the higher end games like Bloody Roar 2 or Tekken 3. And then the last console that I wanted to test was PSP because it was advertised that it can actually run them. And I've got to say that it really can't run the PSP games very well at all. You get major stuttering, crazy slowdown, the games are very unplayable. And sure, it can absolutely launch the game, but you definitely can't play it. So coming around full circle and looking at this thing for my final thoughts, I would say that this is a good handheld system. If you're buying it, going into it knowing that you're not going to really get much more out of it than maybe a little bit of N64, maybe a little bit of PS1 play, but mostly if you're going to be looking at some of the 8 and 16-bit consoles. But that's more or less it. I am going to leave some links in the description down below if this is something that you guys want to pick up. Again, I do want to give a shout out to Retroid Pocket for sending this out to me for review. It is greatly appreciated. But that's more or less it. Let me know in the comment section down below if you guys have this device or maybe a rebranded version of this device and what you think of it. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you didn't like it. Thank you so very much for watching, and I will talk to you guys again real soon.